Welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations, the space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the foundational concepts and support to grow their ideas into products. Being a first time founder is definitely fun, challenging, and more than anything, a roller coaster ride. Whether it's transitioning from being an operator or scaling up a side project to something big, the energy and focus are like unparalleled. So, what's it like to hit the start button for foundership? And what are the things to keep in mind, trade offs to handle during the sessions, and uncertainties to wait for? Let's chat with the one and only Aarthi Ramamurthy, entrepreneur, creator, product advisor, and a bearer of so many other hats. Aarthi runs the Good Time Show with her partner Sriram, and she formerly led product teams at Clubhouse, Netflix, Facebook, and Microsoft, while also co-founding two amazing startups. Hi, Aarthi.
Hi, Aishwarya. This is so fun. Thank you so much for having me. I just listened to that whole intro and I was like, wow, that was really well done. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And yeah, it was definitely fun writing the intro for you because I'm like, I don't want to like put labels there because I just have so much to talk to you about considering like you've had like a very, very versatile background. So yeah, first.
You're very kind. I think the other way to say it is just jack of all trades. I've just been fairly random and tried to kind of go where my curiosity takes me and try to do different things and not kind of get siloed in one thing. So
Yeah.
it's been really fun and interesting, but it's been a lot of learning as well, just trying to do different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the core themes of the Founders Foyer as well. Like for people who are very curiosity driven. And, that was really one of my questions to you in the show as we progress and you like brought it on right in the intro. So yeah, I'm definitely like waiting to dig deeper onto the
Awesome.
whole curiosity part of it. But yeah, how is it to be on the other side, Aarti, after, like hosting shows with people?
Yeah, I think now I'm starting to get used to it. So we started the show called The Good Time Show about 2 years ago. And initially we started it as a live audio platform. Like we started it on Clubhouse. And so no video. It happens
Mm,
live. And it was also during the peak of the pandemic. And, as I'm sure you remember, it was all this time of social distancing. People just stayed at home. And so this was a time where everyone kind of felt lonely and joining the clubhouse conversation felt like you were a part of something else. It just gave you that little bit of respite from just being alone by yourself. And so the show just really started taking off then.
mm.
And, since then, this summer, we moved it to video as well. We moved it to YouTube. And it's been really fun. And video is a completely different beast compared to audio. With video, we've been the hosts of the show. We do like one interview a week or so. And right now, I think we're at like 25-ish episodes on video. And so it's definitely interesting to be the guest on a show because part of me feels like I have a lot of empathy for what you're going through, where you want to structure the conversation. I'm sure you're thinking about how this flows, how you're going to thinking about adding value to your audience and whether it's actually useful for them. But part of it is also, trying to make sure that there is this good guest host dynamic
Yeah.
and trying to make that happen. So I fully empathize with where you are and just really happy to be here.
Thanks for like actually covering what it takes to be on the behind scenes, right? And like I
Yeah,
think that's also like the fun part if you really enjoy being in the conversation with folks that you would really love having chat with. So
I
yeah, I
think
think
so.
I'm like yeah, super, super excited on that and good to know that you love being a guest as well here. Yeah, Arti. I want to start with the whole background of yours because folks have obviously like known from some of your earlier talks about how you picked your first career with Microsoft and then you moved on to the Valley and the
Yeah.
stories that come after that. But
Yeah.
I would like to dig more into who Aarti was as a person. Like, from being crazy about maths to taking up engineering and going ahead to build products. You explored tech when tech itself was exploring in its own times. So how is
Right.
it to pick a career back then when everything was so explorative? And like when you look back now, how do you see it to have grown as you connect the dots?
Yeah, great question. I think so. My backstory quickly is I grew up in Chennai, New Delhi first, and then Chennai after, and kind of very typical kind of upbringing. didn't have a computer for a long time. And I think at some point my dad got us a PC for the house, like Windows
Mm.
3.1, later on like Windows 95. And we started like I started playing around with, oh, this is kind of what a computer does. And at that time too, it was fascinating, but I didn't know how to write code. And I started picking up basic programming. And I think my dad got us like a phone connection with like internet, the dial-up internet of that time. And that was a game changer, right? Like I could meet all these people online who I would not generally would have met because they're not like my neighbors or anything. And so we would like hang out in these communities where, if you liked physics, you could like hang out in a particular chat room with like physics enthusiasts, like the yesterday of like Reddit's chat rooms, but like,
Mm.
back then of that time. And so that was really fun, learned a lot. That's kind of where I was like, wait, this is really fun. The internet is great. It's really going to explode. At some point, dial-ups and the speed's going to get better. I should really learn how to go program, not so much to go make a living or like a business opportunity, but it just felt like there was this
Mm.
promise of this new place, this new space that I didn't know about. And, for me, I still think there is so much power if you're interested in computers and computer science with respect to how much you can do with how little. Like if you have like a reasonable internet connection with a laptop in your house, you can build incredible things. Like so much of the content available for learning is free, lots of people willing to help. Which I think is very different from, at least for me, from like other industries, like say architecture or,
Mm.
medicine or anything else, where you need to have structure, you need to like learn from a particular kind of, have a more structured disciplined way of like, thinking
Mm.
about ramping up. And
Right.
so that was exciting, that was promising. Started picking that up, started writing some code, met a few people including Sriram at that time on like just nerding out on projects, like writing code for fun. And it just, I remember having a track in like after you finish 10th standard in school where you get to pick, what you want to go major in. Like, you either pick biology or computer science. And it wasn't even a question. Like in my mind, I was like, I just can't believe that somebody actually would go pick biology. Like this is just not a choice for me. And I ended up picking up computer science. And again, when I graduated, this was right after like dot-com bust and everything, and computers were like, people were telling folks to like stay away from computers. They thought it was a fad. Don't get a degree here. There are no jobs here. I remember just like walking into my college, PhD Tech, Coimbatore, doing a master's in software engineering, and even the seniors who were graduating that year is like, but why? Like of all the options, why did you
Mm.
pick this kind of thing? So it felt really sad to like pick up computer science. But to me, I felt like I was very interested in it. I couldn't possibly think of like another career path. And I felt like if I was good enough in this, I can like build something and make it happen. And so
Yeah.
honestly, a lot of it was like blind faith. It was not strategic. It was not structured thinking. And I also got very lucky because by the time I graduated, the market got really hot again for people who are like engineers, like software engineers, product managers. And so there was this like definite period of boom. And I just
Mm.
happened to be lucky graduating then and I ended up working at Microsoft right after college.
Yeah. No, I think this is something that really brings forth the value around how you get to follow what your interests are, right? I mean, a lot of questions you had back then you wouldn't have answers, but looking back at it now, you're like, oh, that really made sense in the hindsight because I got to do these couple of things, and
Yeah.
very luckily it connected to a couple of realms that you thought it wouldn't exist. So
Right.
yeah, it's so good to know about the story. That was like right before what the world knows around Microsoft and what came after. So that was actually one of the topics that I wanted to chat with you as well, because I like it when you say that you followed interests, and when you said who would take biology. Sorry, I was one of those folks who actually had biology interests, but then like it's kind of an overlap of both computer science and biology.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
no,
was
I totally get it. And my sister, who's way younger than me, she was the exact opposite, where she looked at it and said, who takes computers? I can't, what? That makes no sense to me. And, she's a nutritionist now, and it worked out really well for her. But there was also a point in time where I was like, wow, we're like siblings, but we're so different from each other. So I totally get it. And I think, yes, it is about following passions, but I actually think it really is more about, do you feel like you can take a bet on yourself and make
Yeah,
something out of it? Because I
yeah,
don't know if following your passion alone is like the right strategy.
yeah,
And so you kind of have to like, it's high risk. And, I think it is also unfair that when you're in your teens, you kind of have to like pick a career path and that's it. Like you just fall
yeah,
into it.
yeah.
And I think that's like really hard on kids. And so somehow we just ended up being lucky, but it could have
Hmm.
gone any other way too.
Yeah, no, that's exactly one thing that I often talk amongst my circle of friends as well. That if you look back, you're like, oh, wait, we were made to choose between like two hard domains, and you're like, okay, just pick one and then go towards it. Because with me as well, I can clearly see how I ended up studying biology because I really love the subject, but I also work with computers right now. So it's like,
Right.
why can't I have like an
Both
intersection
of
of,
these. Yeah.
yeah, both of these? Why can't I tie an interest across a couple of streams, and which rightly brought to even how you describe your career going through, right? Like, why can't I pick this because I'm more
Yeah.
interested in making a bet out of this, and I wanted
Yeah.
to explore
Yeah.
more on this. So
Totally.
yeah, I think in the hindsight, like, why should we be forced to pick a certain domain and like stick to it because you feel like somebody made a choice that you have to make a career out of this.
I mean,
So
I think
yeah.
now there is a lot more awareness. I think now there is definitely people being like, even after they graduate with a degree, they're like, well, I just don't think I want to go do this, and kind
Hmm.
of pivot career paths and do it. Like you don't see a lot, you don't see big numbers of it yet, but I do see
Hmm.
people being able to like do it.
Hmm.
I think a lot of it comes down to, can you take a bet on yourself in this other field and other industry? Can you go do it? And two, I think it
Right.
also comes down to economics, because now you're ramping up from
Hmm.
scratch in this new space, which means you're going to take a few years to like,
Yeah.
become an expert, settle in, have gainful employment and all of that. And I think,
Hmm.
if the circumstances work out, then, you can go pursue it, but it is definitely much harder.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And with the whole recession and all of the other things happening right now, I think there's more than ever chances of people wanting to try following some of their other interests. And I'm not calling it passion because I am with you on that. Like it's not
Yeah.
just blindly following your passion, but trying to take a bet on your interests. So do you have like
Right.
a certain rationale around it? Like do you say like in terms of, okay, well, this has worked out for me because I look at it from this lens of decision making. So when it comes to like building a curiosity driven career, have you generally used a rationale around it, or like any steps that you would like to suggest?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I wish I was like that structured about how I made decisions, but I think a lot of it, like in retrospect, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I started my career at Microsoft, and a lot of what I built was infrastructure products. Like I worked on developer tools, I worked on runtimes, compilers, very low level engineering problems. And that was really fun for me. And in retrospect, it kind of worked out because I think for me, like my strengths really lie in like understanding technology in a really deep way and
Mm-hmm.
being able to go up and down the stack. Like I can be a product manager, I can understand, user use cases, user personas, try and figure out like what the strategy should look like. Are you seeing around corners? Are you seeing like how do you go price things? What would go to market look like? But also then like be able to go down the stack and have this conversation with engineers on like what exactly needs to be done, what how do you cost a particular project. And so like now it all sounds like, yeah, those are like table stakes, but I didn't realize back then that those were the skills that I was picking up and I was
Mm-hmm.
actually like good at doing it. So I spent about 6 years learning that at Microsoft, and so grateful for that, because most people, conventional wisdom is like when you graduate from college, don't go work at a really big company. And we did, but I think for us, for both me and Sriram, I think it worked out really well because we had incredible mentors. And these were people who had spent 20 years, 25 years at Microsoft. Like they like literally definitively wrote books on the topics that they were working on. And so it was great to just go learn from them and just kind of be
Yeah.
that idiot who's like asking them dumb questions, and not get judged. So we had that like layer of safety where we could just be ourselves and learn.
Yeah.
And it also like helped us figure out how successful companies get run. And
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have to like go start our own companies and learn from our mistakes first. We could
Yeah.
go like learn from Microsoft, which was, making a lot of money, could like afford to like have, really junior people like us be able to like build products.
Hmm.
And we learned a lot about culture, structure of like shipping code. What would that look like? At some point, I remember like looking at Windows source code and being like, oh my God, like this is amazing. And so, just I feel like to a lot of people who graduate from school, college as such, I would kind of say it's okay to go find that employment where you feel like you can go have the maximum learning. Because I feel
Hmm.
like there is a lot of FOMO with people on what if I really want to do a startup? What if I don't get the chance later? What if I like become stagnant in this job? And I think it's like you're kind of sort of overthinking it. Like you have to go figure out what skill set you need to go pick up before you
Hmm.
do it. So to your question, you mentioned recession and we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know how long it is going to be,
Yeah.
how deeply impacted people are going to be, but you're already seeing like layoffs in different companies and all of that. I thought, looking back, COVID was kind of that time frame where people at some point kind of like sat up and said, wait a second, like I really don't like doing what I'm doing.
Hmm.
I feel like I've just been putting up with this thing for a long time. I actually
Hmm.
want to go pick up this other skill set and just like go into it and learn something new. And you
Hmm.
kind of saw COVID be that moment where
Yeah.
people would just actually figure out like, or start working on side projects because they had all this free time sitting at home. They're not socializing
Hmm.
with their friends. And so we started seeing a lot of that happening, which I think is really encouraging. I feel like a lot of people kind of like the thing that I think people struggle with is to like kind of be alone with yourself and figure out what you want to do. And I think COVID was kind of like for all the bad stuff, and COVID was really bad all over the world. I think one silver bullet there was like it kind of made people more introspective and start
Hmm.
looking into themselves on what they want to do and what they want out of life. And that I
Yeah.
think was like kind of a positive thing.
Yeah, I think that was also the onset of what could help us right now at this turning point in time to go back and say, okay, I had this kind of a revelation back then, so I think I could apply the same thing right now, considering the situation is sort of same or like it's sort of
Yeah.
weaning around the same wheel. So
Yeah.
that's there, and the other point that I really liked about what you said is to go find out what really interests you, because often when it comes to like let's say Twitter or LinkedIn or those places that I often find folks averaged out, right? Like trying to say, like I think these are the skills that are needed. So let me just go try to look at it. But it's never coming from the point of, okay, wait, do I really have interest for this? Do I really want to like see if this fits my like learning pattern right now, or do I want to like learn something absolutely different? So instead of averaging out the skills or like trying to go around what's more trending, like you said, get more retrospective about what makes more sense to you, and try
Hmm.
to like go behind the interests or goals in that same.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I think finding ways to like figure out opportunities that plays to your strengths, I think
Yeah.
is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes sense. So yeah, a little more into your product journey, where you started with Xbox Live, and then you
Yeah.
went on to Netflix to the build the video streaming SDK. I still remember Marina Mokliko. She once said, if you want to find the lady who put the button to your remote, the Netflix button to your remote, just find Aarthi. That really stuck to me. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna like ask Aarthi that, are you the lady who put the button to the remote?
And she was
So
being super generous about it. But yeah, like the team that I worked on, I was a product manager on the Netflix SDK team, which means uh, my job was to, and this is like Netflix from a long time ago, right? Like
mm,
no original content, no The Crown or House of Cards or anything else. It was all like third party studio content, and
mm,
no international. So Netflix was only US at that point. We tried to do a Latin America expansion when I was working there, but that was like
mm,
semi-successful, not that great. And so very, very small company as such. And kind of a new bet for me coming from Microsoft into like a much smaller Silicon Valley company. But
yeah.
my job at that time was to build the Netflix SDK, which basically this is a software that goes into TVs and set-top boxes and Blu-ray players. So my job was to go work with Samsung or a Sony or a Panasonic and integrate Netflix into their devices, so that when customers who bought the TV would like press a button, they would see Netflix and they can like have it integrated, so they didn't have to go download the app and do things like that. So yes, like that was one of the things that my team did, is like put that red Netflix button on the remote control. But I don't think I can take like solo claim for that. She was just being really generous and nice about it.
Yeah, no, but absolutely, you definitely played a big part there. So it's good to know that something as simple as clicking a button actually, involved a lot of product work, and
Yeah.
that's something that often people overlook, because with products, the outcome that you get is more, oh, it looks so easy, but the behind scenes of what went in is something that involved like days and hours and like years of work. Yeah, one of my questions was around this, like how from being an operator working on a couple of these products to being a founder, where you initially worked on True and Co, and then you worked on Bluepoint, which actually became one of the top 25 startups in the valley, right? So how did you validate
Yeah.
what you wanted to work on, like whether it's products or whether it's
Yeah.
like the product that you're building? What did you do to validate some of the work that you did?
Um, I've always wanted to start a company, like do like a tech startup, and always had the itch for it. I think when I moved to Seattle, I'd never actually moved, like I'd never traveled outside India. And so the
Mm-hmm.
first time I traveled out, I basically packed my suitcase and moved to Seattle, which was like super daunting because I had no idea what it would look like. Like, my vision of America was all from like watching shows like Friends.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was like very, very different, because I think I landed in Seattle last day of November or something, tomorrow to the day.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just really cold, snowy, um, felt like, and I had no kind of like winter wear, because, you're in Chennai, like what are you using the wool coats for? It was kind of a culture shock for me. But I remember like being there working through Microsoft and being like, someday I want to go start a startup. And at that time, the conventional wisdom was to, if you want to start a company, you have to come to Silicon Valley. I don't think that's like necessarily true. It really depends on the kind
Mm.
of company now. But at that time, that definitely was a sentiment. So when I ended up joining Netflix and moving to Silicon Valley, I was like, okay, I think, I can actually go do this kind of thing. So I'd spent like a little over a year at Netflix, and I was like, yeah, I think I need to like figure it out. So that's kind of when, two companies basically back to back, I'd gotten started. And I think having worked at like a really big company as like Microsoft, and then like a much smaller company like Netflix, when
Mm.
I started my own company, I think it was really helpful to have a sense of structure on how to go
Mm.
about building things, how to deal with ambiguity. Like I felt like I could do product. Like product was like well under control because I was experienced enough to go do that. Now I have to go learn everything else, from like
Mm.
fundraising, hiring people who are like not necessarily just technical, because we had e-commerce companies, which means we had like fulfillment centers. We needed to hire people for packing and shipping things. Then I had to go figure out what does shipping logistics look like, and
Mm.
had to deal with like this all other set of problems. But the thing that gave me a little bit of faith and confidence was that product was like under control. I could do that.
Right.
And so that was helpful. And I generally say this to founders too, when you're starting something, it's like pick up the thing that you think your strength is and kind
Mm.
of set that aside. And at some point, you're going to have to like find somebody else to like replace you there, because you'll have other things to go work on and solve. But having something that you're really good at and you have confidence in gives you this like morale boost for yourself, because a startup is tough. I mean, there are days when you're just like thinking, are you crazy? Why did you do this? Like, why did I leave a really, really good job? And why did I start this
Yeah.
thing? What if it fails? What will my parents say? What will everybody else say? Oh my God, like what, I have this employee who's like working for me now. What would I tell them? And oh, my investors, I don't want to let them down. And there is a lot of like guilt and shame and just, confusion around like building a company. But at some point, you also have a sense of clarity. You've always wanted to go build this. You know that you're like kind of sort of doing this. You may not have all the right answers, but you're well on your path to go figuring it out.
Yeah.
And so I think picking up some sort of experience, either as like working at a different company or being an intern for a different startup founder or something of that sort, I think is like really helpful, because that way
Mm.
you don't have to, even with it's not even about the experience or anything. It's not even about the learning. It's about like your own confidence level
Yeah.
on what you think you can do versus not.
Mm.
Because at that point, early stage startups are entirely a confidence game, and your own psychology works against you, and you kind of have to like manage that.
True. Yeah. And that's a great tip because just try to figure out what is your strong base at and try to find all the other things that you feel unprepared for as yet and try to like
Right,
close in on the
right,
loops. Yeah,
right.
that makes sense. And just to dig a bit deeper, do you have like a particular incident or like a story that you remember from being unprepared for a certain thing and then like you constructively work towards, let's say when you were building Lumoid, for example?
Yeah. Lumine, I think initial parts like going through Y Combinator.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, like at that point, I knew about YC, but I didn't know a lot about it. I didn't know anybody there,
Yeah.
and
That
we had
was the
applied.
last batch that PG also
PG
was
was in.
involved.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So this was summer 2013. And I was like, well, let's see what happens. And everybody I talked to at that time to just get advice were like, oh, it's so hard to get through IC. Like, don't
Hmm.
get your hopes up. Like, everybody kind of started telling us, like, oh, you're not going to get through. And that's okay, kind of thing. And I said, well, okay, sounds good. So we had applied, we'd gotten through to the interview process. And then at the interviews, I remember being there in the morning and trying to be like I think we did like one round with a few folks in the room. It was 10 minutes. I didn't feel really good about it because it felt really rushed. And I felt like I didn't convey all the points that I wanted
Hmm.
to. And then that ended. But like right at the end, I remember like flipping my laptop around being like, this is our website. We worked on this basically all night. You kind of have to like look at it. And I remember Carrie Tan like looking at it saying, that's a beautiful site. You put in a lot of thought into it. And it felt like even if I don't get through, I feel validated. Like this
Yeah.
YC partner who I respect, like said good things about it. And I remember in Mountain View, like finishing that interview and walking around, the YC office. And then somebody came in and tapped us on the back and said, well, we think you're not selected yet. We think we want you to come back for a second interview,
Hmm.
and it'll be sometime later today. So just hang out here. So I remember
Right.
like our interview, the first interview was like 9 a.m. or something. And I remember just like hanging out there, talking to everybody else until like 5 p.m. or 5:30 p.m. or something. Um, Maybe not, maybe like 4 o'clock or something like that. And I remember the second interview was with like PG and Jessica. And,
Hmm.
I'd followed PG for years and years. I
Yeah.
have his book. I was a Lisp programmer, and, this guy is like really big in Lisp. And so I was like, oh my God, all the things I want to tell this guy. I'm such a big fan. So I was kind of like spellbound. And he was like, I don't think your company is going to be successful. And I
Boom.
remember being like, I felt like, how can you say that? Like, I just kind of like got angry, and I was like, well, here are all the ways in which we're going to make this work. And, we've already figured this out. We have a couple of paying customers. So I think you're like totally wrong about this. And I remember him smiling and looking at Jessica, and he kind of like said, we really try to push founders to see, if they have conviction
Uh,
or something of that sort. And I was like, well, okay, sure. Um, and I was like, well,
that's
even
the
if I
kind of
don't get
stress
through,
testing.
yeah, and I was like, even if I don't get through YC, I'm still going to go build this company. And he was like,
Yeah.
okay. And so, yeah, I remember doing that and then coming out and meeting Sriram, my husband, and we were getting ice cream. And the phone rings, and I was like, whoa, okay, YC called. And I think at that time, they had this thing where if you get through, they would call. And if you don't get through, they would email.
Okay.
Um, and I think there was a system like that. And so I got a call, and I was like, oh my God, what is going on? So I picked up the phone, and they were like, yeah, you're in. And I was like, are you really sure? And I was like, and they laughed, and they were like, yes, but are you sure? And I was like, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, and it's like at that point, the startup was very, very early, right? Like we'd just been working on it for a couple of weeks or so, but it felt kind of validated because
Hmm.
I had no business like going through YC and getting through and all of that. Like I was not a Silicon Valley insider.
Right.
And to this day, I try and like do that. Like the last 6 months, I've basically tried to like figure out how to give back to founders. And I do these like Founder Tuesdays, and like basically open up to office hours where either if you're applying to YC or you're fundraising or you're hiring your first set of people, or you want to put together your first product strategy doc, like whatever I can help with, I try and help founders, because I know how that feeling was to like
Yeah.
be in this completely alien place, starting your own thing and being like, oh my God, will anybody back me? Will I have any
Yeah.
validation? Will I have any paying customers, kind of thing? And it's so lonely. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So that's kind of what I've been doing for the last few months.
Yeah, and thanks to you for doing that, because it's definitely more supportive when there's a person who's done that, and who's trying to like tell you, hey, I'm here, and like this is what I've done, and here's like a couple of things that I've learned. Because a lot of things when you explained just reminded me of the days back when I was toying around with the idea of the founders way. And then I think in our previous call as well, I was trying to tell you how I had this whole early stage creators or founders are not trying to get enough of talks or enough of support, because
Right.
everything is only around like building large companies and then trying to grow things. But what happens to those silly questions that you may have, and like who do you bounce it off
Right.
with? How do you know how
Right.
to do this? Like it brought back memories when you explained how you had the whole
Awesome.
the memories with PG, and like you basically had the reward when you just got like the ice cream as a reward when you just got the whole news. So like yeah, there was like a little detail in it, but yeah, it was kind of fun to know about. So yeah,
Yeah.
thanks a lot for doing that, Aarthi, and I'm glad founders are getting to talk to you, get help from you, and try to use some of what worked for you in the past with your work as well. So yeah.
Yeah, no, awesome. I mean, I learn a lot doing that. I think it also helps me because a lot of these ideas, especially like, new spaces like AI or crypto, I'm also learning, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, like today I like work with a founder where we kind of started looking at stable diffusion and like pulling together like the open source code and trying to figure out how to make it
Hmm.
work for their company. And that was
Interesting.
like, it was great for me because, I would otherwise like not spend that much time like learning that. So for me, it's great to like cross pollinate ideas, learn something new. And founders are so capable. They're so resilient. If you've done this for a couple of years, like the amount that they can like teach you is it's pretty amazing. So this is a fair deal on both sides. Like as much as I try and tell them the mistakes that I've made so they don't get to make it, I think I end
Yeah.
up learning a lot in the process.
Yeah, learning a lot around different concepts, like you said, like something that you wouldn't have chance about in the first place.
Right.
Absolutely. And there's one more thing which was very interesting when you mentioned the fact that as founders, especially working with YC, you get more persistent with what you want to go towards. It's a lot around. Do you have the confidence, and also do you have that focus and energy to like pursue what you're really pitching? So also the tie around where you said there was like we were rushed and we were like just given 10 minutes to explain what we want. So I'm just curious, do you get better at explaining your pitch? Because I generally don't believe in the whole elevator pitch. Or, I always have questions around, but how can you just talk about something in less than a minute and try to convince people? So like, do you get better as founders at trying to explain what you want with all of these, like let's say what you go through at YC, or like how have you done that in the past? Like when people ask you to pitch, and you've done that with a lot of founders and investors yourself, right? So how do you get
Yeah.
better at it?
You have to do it a lot. I honestly think like for us, our fundraising journey, the first fundraising journey with Lumoid was really tough. It took us like 9 months or so to raise
Mm-hmm.
like $800,000. And you look around your batch and everybody's like raising millions of dollars, and they're basically like convincing folks of like the most ridiculous ideas, and it's like it's all great, and you're like, but why can't I do that? And you kind of realize like there it's very easy to kind of blame it on like, oh, elevator pitches are like terrible, or yeah, at some point I was like, maybe it's because I have an accent, maybe because I don't look like a typical Silicon Valley person. But
Mm.
it doesn't matter what those issues are, you kind of have to overcome them. Like it's great that you're like wallowing in your own self-pity on trying to figure out like what are the things that are not in my favor. I'm sure for everybody, even the most like even the person who you look to your right and they're like, oh my God, this person's probably got it easy. I'm sure
Mm.
they're going through some like really shitty days too. And so I think I think at some point I was like, well, sure, I can like think about this and be like, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. Or I can kind of figure out a way to make this work. And
Mm.
so I think I remember, I think I emailed like over 250 investors, angel investors,
Wow.
and I took checks of like any sizes, right? Like any size check, no minimums, nothing. And I remember meeting about 80 plus investors in person.
Mm.
And then from there, like the funnel went down to like, I got checks from like 32, 33 investors, something like that. And this is like
Mm.
the smallest amount you could possibly think of, all the
Yeah.
way up. And so it was a grueling fight. But what that really helped me do is I got really good at pitching, and I got really good at telling my story.
Mm.
Um, and I also think it helped me get better at reading the room and understanding the
Right.
psychology of the investor. Because a lot of it about fundraising or even about recruiting is to like put yourself in their place and figure out like what resonates with them
Mm.
and try and like double down on that.
Yeah.
And you still want to like say the things in the context of your company, but you kind of want to pick an angle which they're familiar with, and you
Mm.
want to like use that. And so I think, again, all in hindsight, because at that time I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. Why is it taking so long? But it helped out. I also think it really helped us figure out how to be scrappy. Um,
Mm.
and I see a lot of founders talk about being scrappy, but boy, we knew how to be scrappy. Like every cent counted. Like we were like, we didn't have runway and we had people
Yeah.
on the team. And so we had to be very, very careful about like what we were spending on.
Mm.
And so that like I think yes, communication for sure, but also like a bunch of other skills that we picked up because of just like the early stage hardship you go through as a founder.
Mm. Yeah, and this shows like a clear example of how there are like so many other factors than product, because often we are clouded with the whole, but I need a product to sell. But
Yeah.
behind that there are like too many other things to focus on. So yeah, thanks for throwing light on that, Aarthi. Yeah, yeah. On a very similar line, I love how Sriram and a bunch of others call you as the dashboard nut, because it's like a very like a nice name to go by, of course. And
Yeah.
since you work with founders through these founder Tuesday sessions and as otherwise, there are like so many vanity metrics focus right now, because there's like always overwhelming talks around, hey, what's your runway like, and what's your daily active users like, and did you cross this line, and did you get this
Yeah.
metric? So how do you usually advise new founders to focus on, especially the one that matters the most for them, when there's like sea of other things to bottle them
Yeah.
down?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I love numbers. I'm very left-brained as a person. And I think for me, it's like, I remember joining Facebook and being like, wow, I'm such a good fit for this company. Everybody is a dashboard nut. Like everyone loves looking at numbers. This is amazing. And it just felt like I'd found my tribe of people. And even I had like an even more of a culture fit than my own startup, which was kind of insane. Um, but yeah, I think there's no one size fits all. Every business is different. What metrics work for you might not work for somebody else.
Yeah.
But in general, depending on like the space that you're in, I mean, if it's payments, you kind of sort of look at like, what is the business model there? If it's like a SaaS like model, then, ARR as such. If you're looking at like, other sorts of like fintech kind of companies, then you look at GMV. If you're looking at social community products, I don't tend to look at like MAU, DAU kind of numbers. I think
Mhm.
those are like fine. I kind of start to look for like time spent on the app.
Yeah.
If that is good and retention is good, I think
Mm.
there's a story there. Oftentimes, the revenue you make or profitability or all of that are like lagging indicators. And so I generally start looking at like, are people interested in what you're building? And
Mhm.
are they spending time utilizing what you're doing? Like, is there value for people? And I also, as much as like it's easy to talk about metrics and kind of be, hardcore about like, numbers and dashboards, there is also, I feel like a lot of founders just kind of, forget the fact that you have to actually go talk to real customers. You have to like understand what it takes to
Yeah.
like, do they actually like what they do, what they're, leveraging or using? If it's an API that you're shipping, how do they feel about it? How is the integration cost, like, and I think uh, founders want to do this. It's not that they don't. It's just that of all the things to stack rank and prioritize, it almost always falls off, or they have this selection bias on, like, I spoke to my neighbor and my neighbor said it was great. I spoke to my dad and my dad said this is the best thing he'd done. And you're like, well, okay, but have you spoken to somebody who is not otherwise incentivized to say nice things to you?
Yeah.
Um, and kind of like
Reminds me
take
of the
that.
mom test book as well, right? Like that tells you, like, obviously you have to make. I mean, you have people lying to you. So how do you make them say the truth to you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, if you had asked my mom, she would tell me the absolute truth, like the hard truth, almost to a point where I'm like, well, okay, cool it. Like, I know it's like it needs work. But I think, yeah, the numbers are good, but the numbers are basically a means to an end.
Hmm.
And for me, it helps me like simplify things into like a business equation of sorts where I can kind of understand
Right.
it. And it's much easier to talk about that because then there are like definite quantities that we can talk about,
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
opposed to being like, this user felt this way, this user felt this other
Right.
way kind of thing, which is when you talk to founders, it's really hard to have like a structured conversation in a short amount of time. So
Hmm.
I tend to like look for data as like a
Hmm.
way to just accelerate the conversation and figure out where I can add value. But
Hmm.
again, like, I think a lot of people just lean into this and say, well, we need to really think about like numbers, we need to think about dashboards, and they start kind of like doing a lot of investment in that area as opposed
Yeah.
to like actually building the product. And I'm like, no, like none of that stuff, like your beautiful charts and dashboard does not matter if your product doesn't work. And so you kind of have to like figure it out. And I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure like your audience is like not so much like in that zone, but every once in a while you'll see founders who are like, but you have to check out this dashboard that we built and we spent a lot of time like custom building this thing. And you're like, but why? Like, you guys are like a two-person startup with like less than 5 customers who are willing to pay. At some point, you can like make this really nice, invest in it. But right now, just like run. Like the only advantage you have as a startup is speed. Might as well like leverage that and just keep going. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it really is about like prioritizing the right things.
Yeah, like the numbers definitely give a sort of structure and gives you like a boundary to talk about, but that should be thought about as an outcome, like you said. When there's no product, you basically don't get numbers, but this
Yeah.
acts the opposite way, where at times people tend to over focus on the numbers, and even when it's not an outcome, but trying to more synthesize that outcome, even when there's no product in hand. So yeah, it could
Yeah.
easily backfire if you don't do it the right way. That's
Totally.
clearly shown. Yeah, yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah. Awesome. So, are there like particular things that these founders struggle with when it comes to like getting these numbers right? Like, let's say there is an absolute need to look at these numbers, but is there like a trend or a pattern that you've noticed where you say like founders of this kind usually struggle here, and this is where like I help them with?
I think, yeah, general broad patterns, and these are just like patterns. It's not to read too much into them.
Hmm.
But first-time founders, you can always tell a first-time founder from a second-time founder. Like for me, second time around, I could like tell, like I
Hmm.
knew there's this certain level of maturity that comes from second-time founders where they've seen like the early struggles, the journey,
Hmm.
and what it takes to like build it out. And so I mean they'll probably make mistakes, but at least it'll be different from like the ones that they made the first time.
Right.
First time founders are more idealistic. They are less grounded in the sense of like, I kind of like that like non-cynical view that they have, which is like I can do anything. If we build this, like lots of users will come use it, and then we will be like $1 billion company in like a couple of years. And they'll just like lay out this plan where you're like, you kind of want to sit back and be like, man, like I wish I was like as idealistic as you are, kind of thing. And you feel like, there's a part of you that feels like, am I so jaded? Am I so cynical that I don't see it? But you also want to like give them the right kind of framework to think about, like, okay, how do you think about scaling? How do you think about competition? How do you think about
Hmm.
finding growth if you're looking at international expansion? Like trying to be strategic as opposed to
Hmm.
like, kind of basing it off of like, I have this feeling that things are going to work out kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I think I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what that balance is, where I don't want to make them cynical and jaded, but I also don't want them to feel like, why didn't this person just give me advice sooner? Like
Yeah.
this is the reason why I went and spoke to her, kind of thing.
Mm. Mm.
Other stuff, when to go hire people, when to hire your like team of execs, when to hire like people to replace the functions that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's different for different companies, but at some point you're going to have to figure it out. Most founders do it too late and then they're like burnt out, or they don't trust the person that they've hired, and there's just a lot of issues that comes out of it. That I focus on fundraising. And fundraising is this whole like, for a lot of people it can be challenging because you've never,
Yeah.
like in life you don't generally go about asking people for money. And so it's a very different kind of psychology, skill set, all of that. So it's part sales, but also part like, storytelling, part like product vision, and just being this like enigmatic founder persona who can like, talk about the metrics. Like you kind of have to like check all of these check boxes,
Mm.
paint this vision of this future where it's going to be really successful, ground it in metrics, give them a sense of like where they can be helpful, what you're going to use the capital for. So you kind of have to do part art and part math. And I think it's kind
Yeah.
of this like big skill set. So I try and help a lot with that. Either it's like pitch decks that I can review, or introductions to other angel investors like myself. Like I do some of
Mm.
that. So
Mm.
wherever I can help. Um, Second time founders, mostly they have their things together. They are like, we know exactly what we're doing, and a lot of more often than not they'd come to me for like angel investment
Mm.
um and introductions. Like they know exactly who they need to talk to.
Right.
They have very specific challenges that they're trying to overcome,
Mm.
and they try and like they're very explicit about the problems that they need solving. And
Right.
that's like, it's different because part of it is like you kind of miss the idealistic first time founder attitude, but part of it is like it's like a freight train coming at you. They're very focused, they know exactly what they want, and they
Yeah.
spend their time just like asking you for solutions or asking like brainstorming with you, and
Yeah.
that's a different energy level altogether. So I enjoy both.
Yeah, no, definitely. I can see your energy as you like explain both of these types, and I mean, to me, it sounds like a lot of context switching as well, right? Because like with the first time founders, you're more around, hey, like look at these things, and I think you're not trying to cover these. But with the second category, it's more around, hey, I think you're very
Right,
specific, but yeah, let's just like look at some of the other
right,
like points in it as well. So yeah, it
right, right.
definitely sounds like a lot of painting different pictures, but yeah, sounds super fun. And you, I think, subtly answered one of the other questions that I like wanted to, get your thoughts on is, do you kind of use the same rationale when it comes to angel investing as well? Because helping founders automatically helps you translate what you look for in a certain
Yeah,
founder before you
yeah.
invest in their movement, like before you want to join them in trying to achieve it. So I think you rightly got your essence with it. Like, how do you go about in angel investing in their work?
Yeah, I mean, now a lot of people find me through, either the podcast or through IG, and reach out. And, it's like, I almost never like will do an angel investment just by like people reaching out and saying, hey, I'm looking for angel investment. I almost
Hmm.
think you kind of sort of want to like figure out, like, I like to understand what they're building, why they're building this, what their motivation is, where, if am I the right person to like help them with this
Hmm.
thing? Are they better off just like not raising now and raising in the future? So I kind
Right.
of want to like get into a little bit of the details
Hmm.
before like, writing a check kind of thing. And I almost, for a lot of these founders, um, the check part, like the money part itself, is almost like the very last thing that they need. I think a lot of it is like they are trying to figure out how to scale this, how to grow this, how to find product
Hmm.
market fit and all of that stuff.
Hmm.
And so those are the things I enjoy doing. And the thing I like, a nice side effect of that is like, then I try and like work with founders who I really like, and I try to like help
Hmm.
them. They then offer to be like, hey, do you want to angel invest, and make sure. And so it like
Hmm.
works out. So I don't do it as like a primary objective, but it kind of
Yeah.
happens as like a secondary mechanism, and that's interesting too.
Yeah, it's a good by effect to come
Yeah.
in terms of it. And I mean, totally agree with you on how people would like to find that that inner circle of supporters who would give them like more sound advice and practical tips on how to go about the things. Because I mean, if
Yeah.
it can happen more so for side projects and those little things that we end up building, I can definitely imagine the scale at which it could happen for like full time companies, and founders are very serious about what they're
Right.
doing, and they would like to like
Right.
get some navigation as they go about. So yeah.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So yes, and I love questioning people about the way they think, and like rather than asking for specific frameworks. So I'm pretty sure that when founders work with you, they're always like, "Hey, do you have like a tried and tested method to do this?" But I love asking people more about the way they think, because I think product is all about building that mindset. So how do you hone that mindset, and what's generally your way of thinking? Like if people are just going to ask you like, "Hey, Aarti, what's your style of thinking?" Like, do you generally go about retrospecting on, these things matter the most to me, and this is how I usually go about thinking?
Yeah, that it really depends on what the problem space is, right? I mean, I feel like in my mind, I'm like very chaotic and unstructured in how I think about things. I really jump from like one place to the other. I try to make connections with like past patterns I've noticed,
Hmm.
and try and figure that out. But when it comes to like company building and stuff, there are some very basic frameworks. I tend to look at like who's your customer base, what's the background of the founder, why are they building this thing, what are they solving for, what's the motivation. But then beyond that, unit economics of the business, revenue and scaling, what does that look like. Both of my companies were e-commerce businesses where unit economics was really important. And so that kind of got me into this methodology of like thinking about, what are all the amounts that are coming in and what are the amounts that are leaving.
Hmm.
And net, are we making money? Are we losing money? At what point are we going to be, gross
Sure.
profitable, net profitable, and think through that stuff. And that was really helpful. I think one person who was really instrumental in getting me to think about it that way was Katrina Lake, who's the founder of Stitch
Hmm.
Fix. And she was an advisor for us, and just fantastic mathematical brain to like think through financial modeling. And that was really helpful. I think outside of and I think a lot of founders don't do that now because either they're building
Yeah.
companies that don't really need that unit economic style of thinking, or they kind of look at it as like, I fundraised, I have enough runway, I just need to like keep going. um I think it's healthy to have a sense of like what's coming in versus going out, kind of like any
Yeah.
like your own personal finance budget, household budget, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. Just trying to think through that. I tend to look at like playing finite versus infinite games, and
Hmm.
that's like one thing that Sriram and I talk about a lot. And a finite game, like think of it like a typical video game where you start, you play multiple levels, and you kind of like elevate through like 1 to 10
Hmm.
or whatever, and then you win, you exit the game, and everyone goes home.
Yeah.
Infinite game is a game that never ever ends, and I kind of feel like life is kind of an infinite game where you have to like, you don't do this to get to a next level, to advance into something else. Like, a lot of people go through life on like, if I help this person and did something, they would do something back for me in return, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And it feels very zero sum. But I
Yeah.
think a lot of people, the best people I've known, and a few of them like are people I look up to, play the infinite game. And it's infinite sum, where it's like, it's not that if you get something, I don't have that something, or if I did
Hmm.
this something for you, you do something back for me. Like, it's not
Yeah.
that. They think of it as like, I put like good things out there, and then good things will like eventually come back, but it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Like, I'm just going to like
Yeah.
keep doing this. And I think that's really powerful. Like, playing the infinite game, I think, is really powerful because it frees you of constraints. It gets
Hmm.
you out of this mindset of limited, like zero sum thinking. And it really helps you think about it as like not doing things expecting something in return. And I think it's like, it's kind of a good way to live. It's like a fun kind of flavor to apply, especially when you look at it from like Silicon Valley and technology world and
Yeah.
where we are in. We, like Sriram and I, are very much like students, beneficiaries of that thinking, because when we first came here, people would just introduce us. They would just be like, hey, you should like talk to this person. And like, okay, I don't know them. And they'd be like, here is an introduction. And they would just do it. And half the time I'd be like, but why did you do that? Like, what do you want from me? Why are you being so nice? Kind of thing. And I see that now with like a lot of people who are coming, like are new to Silicon Valley. And when I mean Silicon Valley, it's not even like a physical place. For me, it's like this mindset of like building tech companies kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to inculcate this culture of like, no, it's okay to like ask for stuff. It's okay for
Mm.
people to like, connect others. It's okay to be helpful without expecting things to come back to you and all of that. And yeah, I'm a big fan of that. And I don't know if that actually answers your question, but it's something that I ask a lot of people to like read up about, think about, and
Yeah.
figure out if that's something that they can apply to their daily lives.
Yeah, and it does answer my question. So,
Yeah.
what really I agree upon as well here is often people box up their thoughts around like, okay, do I play to win? Do I like look at what do I get in short term? Like I put A, B, C things and I like get X, Y, Z back. But
Mhm.
this very recent time, I was also thinking about how tech is not the place where, like you try to put something in and then you immediately get it out. They're like when you're
Mhm.
working on something, you have folks who you like reached out very long back, helping you right now with things without even expecting anything in favor back, right? So
Right.
that's one of the most powerful things that can happen to us because of the fact that we have an amazing network around and that we have folks that we don't have to expect return help from, but we can go ahead and help them with what we know, like share what we know about. So
Yep,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely like it also builds a very healthy environment around us, and I think more of that is happening around with platforms and with communities around. But yeah, like looking forward to more people adopting that as a mindset.
Yeah. No, totally. I think I'm a fan of it. It's not probably for everyone, but I found a lot of benefit into getting into
Hmm.
that like state of thinking. And honestly, I
Yeah.
think like I think I learned a lot from just like observing Sriram because he's always been that way, where
Hmm.
he would just like, like this is from like him at like college, right? Like, and just does things without expecting things in return, kind of sees it as like multiplicative than like, reductive as
Yeah.
such. And I think
Yeah.
it's like it's a really healthy mindset to go have.
Yeah, and it's very exponential as well. Like not just in terms of immediate returns, but
Yeah.
exponentially helps you grow better as a person as well. So
Yes, exactly.
like
Yeah.
like without it having like a direct impact, you kind of sense it all in the back scenes. So yeah,
Yes,
that's true.
exactly. Yeah.
That's true. So yeah, one of the last sections of this chat, Aarti, is to do with the Good Time Show. So, I remember being a follower of the show from the times of you folks launching it on Clubhouse. In fact,
Nice.
very recently, like I met my friend and I was telling her, "Hey, do you remember? It was Elon's show back then, and it was her wedding. So I was basically watching the wedding, and I'm like, well, Elon is also talking, and Aarti and Sriram are hosting. So I was like way back here with the call and looking at the wedding. So I was like, we
Oh
were like
man.
recounting the whole experience about how it used to be such a huge thing back when you started out on Clubhouse and when you said how you transformed the whole thing to be like a video project as well. So what I find interesting is the variety, rather the versatility of guests that you bring through. And it's
Right.
not just with respect to like, okay, yeah, let's just take only tech as a focus, or let's just like go deep down, just focus on like,
Yeah.
stars from certain industry.
Yeah.
But it's definitely good to learn from folks who are out there doing great stuff. In fact, stuff that we barely know about, but we would love to know more about and learn from them. So how do you plan on running the show this way, and what kind of work you put into before reaching out to each of these guests? Because content
Man.
creation is a
Yeah.
strong game, right? So how do you
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
get better?
Yeah. I mean, it's it takes a lot of effort. I won't deny it. And we try and like split up responsibilities between me and Shriram. So I think, yeah, like I think you kind of covered it. One is like reaching out to guest booking. That's like a whole task by itself on like scheduling, figuring out what works for them, that kind of thing. And once you do get them on the show, then you have to figure out like topics to discuss, what's okay to talk about, what's not, which means on your side, then it translates into like preparation, like how much do you want to
Mm-hmm.
prepare? I try to go in like semi prepared, like I don't want to know everything that ever was about this person, but at least like figure out some new topics, things that they've been like recently working on. so that it feels like a more relevant current conversation. Because at the end of the day, you're doing this in service of the people who are like listening and watching the show, and so you want this to be useful for them. I think preparation, that's a whole other thing. Then the recording part, like the actual interview itself, like that's the most fun for me, because
Mm.
it gives me a great way, like the whole Good Time show is like a great way for me to go learn from all these people, and asking them questions that I would like normally would ask them if I'd like sat down next to them and like had lunch or dinner with them, kind of thing. So it's just really fun. So we do the show, then you have editing, post processing, thumbnails, all of that stuff, putting it on different platforms, scaling, and then people leaving comments,
Mm.
tweets, replying to all of that. There's this whole like viral loop that we're trying to go figure out, and then scaling the platform, growing it. So this is like once a week, every week, and we kind of like rinse, repeat, and do this. So it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. We're trying to get better at like streamlining some of these operations. Like now we have
Right.
help. We have people who can like help us with like editing the content itself, slicing and dicing into like reels and
Mm.
short form videos and all of that stuff. Thumbnail, we're getting help, like things like that, so that we are not like doing everything ourselves, but it's still
Mm.
fairly time consuming. But it's honestly like one of the projects that I've really enjoyed doing in recent times. I've never thought of myself as a content creator, and now I have a lot of empathy for people who like do this for a living. Like we don't do this for a living, right? It's just a passion
Yeah.
project.
Yeah.
And there are people who literally like this is where their paycheck comes from, which is, oh my God, the pressure behind that is like kind of crazy. Um, I also think it's gotten us like, Sriram and I have always wanted to work on a project together. And so I think this feels like a good place, like where we've like kind of finally picked up a project where we can like work on something together. And so for the last couple of years, this has been the project that we've been working on, and that feels really nice because this has been like our bucket list for a long time to go do.
Mm. Yeah. And thanks to the pandemic for being an accelerator here, like to bring the
Yeah,
project
I
into
mean, all
actual.
thanks to totally all thanks to Clubhouse. If it hadn't been for Clubhouse, we would have never started it because Clubhouse felt like low friction enough. Like there's no
Yeah.
video, you don't have to like do your hair, look presentable. There's none of that stuff. You kind of sort of like, I sit in a room, Sriram sits in the room, and we basically just like, open up our phones and just like doing a call, we just get on the app and
Mm.
we just did it. And so it got us like that friction of like being a creator. It definitely like
Yeah.
reduced it a lot for us,
Mm.
and got us to a point where we were like confident enough to go do video and other platforms and everything else.
One of the other things I would love for the listeners to go check out that episode of Good Time Show is the one that you do with Pom, because over there
Yeah,
I remember you folks discuss a lot around what it really takes to produce content, what it really means to put something out, and the kind of
yeah,
consistency you would need to do that. So I realized that it's very relatable with folks who are both doing it full time and like folks like us who also have like a day job but try to do something out of like a side project. So
yeah,
yeah, folks should definitely go check that out.
that was a great episode. I think there were a few episodes that like really stood out, right? And you look at like other people doing something like this for a living, and you're like, oh my God, how do you do that?
Mm.
This is so exhausting. But they're clearly good at it. And they've just been able to like build a presence, establish not just on like YouTube, but all these other platforms, and
Yeah.
like really kill it there. And then you look at like celebrities, especially in like the movie music industry, who kind of sort of have to do this all the time. And it's exhausting. And I'm like, wow, like you're always like on message, on point, like trying to do this. And it's like a totally different skill set that I'm really glad that I didn't grow up and be like, I want to be a content creator, because it's like, I think I'd have been terrible at it.
It sounds like a totally new world for us, like right now, like from what you said, like, oh wait, that does this world exist? And like to think about it, the fact that Gen Z and a lot of kids grow up and like the whole professional setup gets changed. Like when people used to ask like, what do you want to become, as you said, you would never say like, well, digital content creator. So yeah, it sounds definitely exciting to see what kind of like a transformational change we have had with tech and with like
Yeah.
all the days to come.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, I mean, we're just about getting started, right? Like there's still most people consume content than create content. Content creation is actually still
Yeah.
like very limited. So we have a long way to go. But I think we are like slowly, eventually getting there where people are incredibly creative. People are smart. People are very driven. So I think it's just like um, the tools that we build and things that we do to be able to like reduce that friction for people to start like being creators more than just consumers.
Absolutely. Yeah. With you on that. And yeah, totally excited to see how this pans out in the years to come. So, yeah, awesome. So, thank you so much, Aarthi. The show has been
Thank
amazing
you.
today. I learned a lot of things, a lot of little stories that which we otherwise wouldn't probably get to know about through like other videos or sessions. But thanks a lot for sharing a lot of what you've been through with both founding startups as well as like working on different product journeys. And yeah, thanks so much.
Oh man, this was really great fun. I think we also covered like a really wide variety of topics. So I hope it was useful for some set of people, or like some of it was useful for folks. And so, would love to like see this go live and, figure out if anyone has any feedback, the other stuff that they want to talk about. I'm always around all the
Yeah.
social platforms and everything else. So this was a blast. Thanks so much for having me, Aishwarya.
Thanks, Aarti.
Yeah, no, thank you.